Welcome to the FAST Podcast, Financial Advisor Strategy Talks with Lara Galloway, SVP of Financial Education at White Glove. Lara provides advisors with an opportunity to hear from some of the best minds in the business. Follow along to learn quick tips to help you grow your business, from gaining new leads to keeping current clients engaged, and everything in between. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the FAST Podcast with your host, Lara Galloway from White Glove. Lara, you look like an angel. I just want to say that out loud.
And I was singing beforehand, but I'm going to spare you this time. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah. And well, can you tell people why your set looks so good today?
Well, it's because don't take this the wrong way, Brendan, but I have one of my favorite behavioral finance crushes on the podcast today. So I am super excited to bring on Brendan Frazier. And let me just tell you a little bit about Brendan before we get started. So Brendan is the founder of Wired Planning and the host of the Human Side of Money podcast, which is phenomenal. And I really enjoy listening to myself. I learn a ton every time I do. He's a keynote speaker, and he was named one of Investopedia's top 100 financial advisors in 2021 and 2022, something to be very proud of. He's building a global community and training program for advisors to master the human side of advice, enhance their clients' lives, and forever change the trajectory of their business. I mean, that's one of the best bios I've ever read on this podcast. So I'm so excited to welcome you to the FAST Podcast, Brendan. Thanks for being here.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that, because I was sending my bio to a couple people just yesterday, looking at it, thinking I really need to add some things to this. I need to make it sound a little better, add some accolades or credentials in there. What could I do? And I was feeling a little bit stressed and insecure about it. So the fact that you said that it feels good in the moment, especially considering this was just yesterday where I was looking at it going, all right, I got to beef this thing up a little bit. How am I going to do it? So
I don't know. I mean, this speaks pretty well and it reads well. So I didn't stumble over trying to say what you are. I didn't have to read a bunch of little acronyms at the end. I appreciate it. Thank you for not giving me the alphabet soup. So
yeah. Yeah. Well, I am very excited to be here. When you reached out, this was this isn't a term I came up with, but it's what I like to call a no-brainer decision. So it's always, I always enjoy coming on here and on these podcasts and talking about things that I'm passionate about, and sounds like you're passionate about too. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, so just to set the stage, I saw you speak at Shift, and that's when I was just like, oh my goodness. And I'd been following you online for a while, but hearing you speak was really, really powerful. And just hearing the difference, the way you take some really complex behavioral finance ideas that sound lofty and really wise and make them super simple is amazing. And one of the things that you do so well on LinkedIn is you make very simple posts. You guys should all follow him. If you're listening right now, make sure you're following Brendan on LinkedIn, because he says, as you go into client meetings today, here are a couple things to think of. And he just, you list one or two or three little simple ideas that if an advisor puts this in their mindset, if that's the mindset they have going into client meetings, they're going to do better. And I love how simple that is. But the thing that really got me, and I'm going to let you totally promote the heck out of this because I really want everybody to know about it, and why I knew I could hook you into the podcast, was saying, hey, you're promoting something about the ultimate guide to intro meetings, I think, right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it was just the ultimate intro meeting.
Ultimate intro meeting. Yeah. So I said, oh my God, Brendan, at White Glove, we bring in these advisors who are guest presenters at educational financial workshops all across the country. That's what we do. We set them up to be a presenter at a financial education workshop where they're going to help people learn things they need to know about their finances. And then these people turn into prospects. They sign up for meetings with the advisor one-on-one. That's our whole goal, is to help them get those meetings established. And then the advisor takes it from there. But how? And when I've just been reading your stuff, and I just thought, this is something that our workshop hosts come back and say to us all the time. Like, look, I'm doing the workshops. I'm a good presenter. I'm getting good leads. I'm getting people that are interested, but I'm not really good at the meetings. I'm a great advisor. I'm very smart. I'm very talented. And I understand the complexities of the market and all this stuff, but getting it into a good meeting and helping my clients feel good and trust me and all that kind of stuff, it's hard. So that's the genesis of all this. That's the background and why I wanted to have you today. And I just wanted to kind of just start off by asking you, what is it about that intro meeting that is so important? What makes it such a make it or break it for an advisor?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Everything you just said is what I hear and have heard for years and years about that meeting, which is like, I know how important it is. I know that I know the things that I should do. I need to nail this so that I can actually work with them on the complexities, the financial planning and advice stuff that I do so well. But like at the end, I would hear advisors say, they'd walk out and they'd be like, I don't really know. I don't know exactly how they felt like that went. I hope that I hear from them. I didn't like the way that I felt after those
Yeah.
meetings. Like it always felt really inconsistent or unpredictable. But every now and then, everybody listening, everybody that's met with a prospect before has also had meetings where you sit there and you go, man, that went really, really well. I wish every meeting could be like that. They trust me. They opened up. They told me everything they needed to know. They clearly saw the value that I could provide, and they're ready to become a client right here at the end of that meeting. And you sit there and you're like, I wish every meeting was like that, right? We've all had that meeting, and then you contrast that to the hangover feeling that you get from those other meetings that don't go that way. And the thought is like, how can I create or maybe even reverse engineer those meetings that I want to have every time to actually have them every time? And so that's kind of where this idea came from, was let's go in and figure out what are the things that make those meetings, the ones that you want to have every time, so successful. And let's reverse engineer and back into it and say, what happens in those meetings that we could transport and try to do in every single meeting? So not that you can literally make it happen every single time. That's not possible. In fact, if I figured out the formula for that, I probably wouldn't be here right now, because I'd be on an island somewhere making loads and loads of money to just for 100% conversion rate. But there are things that we can do to make it the best meeting possible. And so I also want to say this based on what you said, which is, well, you just described that situation where you go, hey, I've got this workshop, this financial education workshop, and I'm helping people, educating people. And then after the workshop, that's where it's time to get them to become a client. That's why I say that this intro meeting, the very first meeting that you have with somebody, is the lifeblood of your business, is because if you can have the best workshop of all time, you can do the best educating of all time. But once they come in and you meet with them, that's how, if you can't help them, you can't do the financial planning work that you're so good at if you can't get them to actually become a client, right? So that's one of the things I say. That's why I call it the lifeblood of an advisory business, because you can be great at marketing and workshops. You can be great at putting together plans and giving financial advice, but none of that matters if you can't get that person to actually become a client at the end of the day.
So what are some of the biggest mistakes or struggles that you have honed in on that advisors who are aware, like I want to do better intro meetings. I don't want the hangover. I want to replicate this really good feeling that I had in a meeting. What are some of the mistakes they're making, or the biggest struggles that you see them challenged with?
Yeah. And I want to be careful here, because oftentimes what most advisors experience are they go out and they do what they've been taught or trained to do. They do what they think they're supposed to do because it's been mapped out or modeled for them that way. So, for example, like I imagine most people listening, if we ask them, hey, how do you go about your intro meeting, this first meeting with a prospect, they would say something like, well, in the beginning, I start off by talking a little bit, trying to create some rapport, build a connection. Then I'll ask them, what's important to them and what's on their mind. And then at some point, I'll talk a little about my credentials and my expertise and the value that we provide, maybe even share a story of how we've helped somebody just like them. And at the end, I'm going to ask for the business and try to get them to move forward. It's like that's sort of the
Pretty good outline. Yeah.
The basic framework that we're all taught at some level or to some degree. So when I say I want to be careful, what I want to be careful with when we talk about mistakes is I don't think that advisors are just willingly or blindly doing things wrong. I just think that the way that we've been trained and taught to do things for so long is backwards. And that's where the mistake is made, is we're focusing on the wrong things. In fact, the things that we do in these meetings would be completely anti what the psychology research would tell you you're supposed to do in these meetings. So now I go back to answering your question. I just wanted to, for anybody that's out there listening,
that's
we've all
great.
been
You're not
there.
making anybody wrong. You're not you're not bad and awful. It's just, this is exactly the way the industry has trained us, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. So the main mistakes, the biggest one that I see, and it makes sense when you think about it, but the biggest one that I see when I talk to advisors is just simply winging it. And when I say winging it, what I mean is they can have a conversation with somebody and have a decent conversation with someone. But if I sit down and I ask 10 advisors, which I've asked more than 10 advisors, but I already know if I ask 10 advisors, hey, what is it that you're going to ask the person in this meeting? What questions are you going to ask them? What is it that you hope to get out of it? how are you going to introduce the meeting? How are you going to close the meeting? If I ask 10 advisors, they'll all give me an idea of what they're going to do. They'll be like, well, so generally I do this, and sometimes I'll do this, and depending on how it goes, I'll do this. But that's why I call it winging it, because there's no clear defined framework for how to guide the meeting. Or whenever I ask, what questions do you ask? You're like, well, I've got this bank of questions and I kind of just pull from it based on what I think makes sense. And so I'm not saying that you should have a script. I'm not saying that you should only ask certain questions and just read as if it's an interrogation. But there's something to be said for going in knowing, hey, I have a purpose for this meeting. And if I have this set of questions, I know it's going to accomplish the purpose that I'm moving towards. It's going to accomplish what I'm trying to do. So most advisors can go in. And in fact, I asked one advisor this. I said, hey, if you went into an intro meeting today, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it? And he said an 8. And I said, all right, tell me about that. And he goes, well, I know that I can do a good job talking to people, getting them to talk a little bit about their situation and their life. And then I can tell them what we do. And then I said, okay, that's great. Now let me ask you a different question. Same question, but asked in a different way. How confident are you on a scale of 1 to 10 that after that meeting, that prospect would become a client? And he said 5. And so I said, okay, do you see where I'm getting at, where I'm going with this? And he said, yeah, I do. Like he's an 8 out of 10 as far as the ability to have a conversation with another human being, but because he goes in and wings it. But when it came down to, hey, is what you're doing going to actually get that person to become a client? It was a 5 out of 10 because he didn't have a clear defined approach or framework that he was taking into the meeting. So that'd be the first thing I'd say. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, like, the way I heard you saying that, it's like the advisor rated his own performance as an 8. My delivery, I was good. I was engaged. I was warm. I was friendly. I listened, all that kind of stuff. He rated his performance, but his results are different. And that's such a good point, Brendan, because that's a huge disconnect that if you haven't actually articulated it that way before, it's like, yeah, I'm really good at these meetings. I always go through my stuff. I've got it, whatever, like I've got it dialed in. I'm good at meetings. It's like, if I relate it to our workshops, like, you can be a good presenter. Yeah, you got through the slides and you said all the things you were supposed to say. You practiced your script. You didn't flub, like the way we might, evaluate ourselves in terms of a performance, but there's something missing there. And I'd love for you to just dial in. What is that missing piece between the 8 and the 5?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where I keep coming back to having a clear, defined framework of how you're going to guide the conversation. So not how you're going to sit there and do an interview or an interrogation and literally just ask these 5 questions in a row and copy them down and move on to the next one, but having a framework, which would, to me, a framework is 3 to 6 questions that you're going to ask in every single one of these conversations, because these questions are aligned with the purpose of the meeting. And so, in other words, what you want to do is go, all right, what's the main thing that I want to do in this meeting? What's the purpose of the meeting? What is the feeling that I want this person to walk away with when they leave the meeting? And then once you get really clear on that, then you can decide what questions should I be asking in this meeting. So here's an example of a way to think through this. So I know there's a question out there that a lot of people like to ask. It's where you say, hey, what was money like in your family growing up? What was money like for you? What was your first earliest memory of money? So I think that's a good question when it's asked at the right time. And so if the purpose of this intro meeting is to build some trust and connection and get the person to see the value that you provide so that they want to move forward and work with you, then looked at through that lens, that's no longer the right question. That's no longer a good question. Now, it's still a good question, just not for that meeting. It's probably a good question for another meeting or another conversation. And so that's what I mean when I say getting clear on what you want to do, what you're going to ask, a framework for the conversation is saying, what questions should I be asking to guide this conversation to where it needs to go? So instead of what's your first memory around money, what was money like growing up? And I'm just picking on that question because I know that there's a lot of people that like to ask that question when they first meet somebody, because it feels like you're building some sort of trusting connection because they're telling you something personal to them. And I get that. I really do. I get the intention behind it. But there's other questions that don't work well in this meeting either. But I bet everybody's kind of wondering, okay, well, that's good that doesn't work well. What does work well, right? Like, what should I be asking type thing. So the two best questions you can ask in these meetings are, what prompted this? Like, what are we doing here? What prompted this? So most people don't wake up in the middle of the night, or they don't wake up first thing in the morning and think, hey, I have a full day next Wednesday, and the one thing that I want to do is go meet with a financial planner and advisor to get a fully comprehensive financial plan. It just doesn't work that way. And I think most of us realize that. Maybe a gut check for some. It's a little bit humbling to admit that sometimes. So you always want to start out by asking, hey, what is it that prompted this? We imagine that you probably didn't think of all the things that I could do today. I want to meet with you, meet with a financial advisor. So what prompted it? Because there's oftentimes a reason. I shouldn't say oftentimes, almost always there's a reason why they've decided to spend their time there with you today. All right. So finding that out, getting them to open up and tell you about that. But then there's another question that goes one step further that gives you even better information, and you start creating a little bit of emotional connection. And when they tell you, you don't just stop with when they tell you what prompted it, but you want to go one step further and ask, why now? In other words, so yes, I know what prompted it, but you could have done this 2 years ago. You could have waited 2 months from now, but here we are today. I'm curious why now. So let me give you an example of what it sounded like. It's the one I give a lot because it's the one that felt most relevant to me. It's from my own experience. So I had a guy that called, said he wanted to meet. And so I asked, he called, we started to meet. He came in and I asked him, hey, what prompted this? Obviously you didn't just decide that you wanted to wake up and meet with a financial planner today. I'm guessing something was on your mind. He said, yeah, I need to start figuring out how to do a better job saving for retirement. Okay. All right. Pretty basic. So I asked a couple more questions around that. Like, okay, I understand that. What have you started doing thus far? Well, nothing really at this point. I mean, that's why I'm calling, is because I know that I need to start doing something, because we got a little bit more money now that we can start putting away. Okay, great. All right. So that gives me a little bit of info, a little bit of insight. But where it got better and where the conversation went to a next level was when I started asking why now. So then I said, okay, well, tell me this. Here we are today. You didn't call 6 months ago. I imagine you probably would have said you should have been saving 6 months ago. You probably should have, you could be doing this 3 months from now, 6 months from now. Why are we here today? And he said, and I love telling this story because it's such a good one and it helps you see the power of it. He goes, well, last week, I'm in Nashville, by the way. So a lot of music people here. This guy works in concert management. And so he's like, last week we were at a show and I saw this guy carrying these heavy boxes to set up the stage, and he looked miserable, and he knew the guy. So he went up and talked to him and he said, hey, you doing all right today? And he goes, no, I don't want to be here. I'm tired of this. I don't want to do any more physical labor. I'm ready to get out. And he's like, well, why are you still here? And he said, because I didn't start saving early enough. Don't make the same mistake that I made. And so when I asked him, why are you calling now? He goes, because when he told me that, I realized that I didn't want to be the 73-year-old that hated his life, having to do heavy lifting when I would rather be hanging out and spending time with my family. And so It was this eye-opening moment of like, he wasn't calling because he wants to start saving for retirement. He was calling because he doesn't want to be the 73-year-old that hates his life and he's still working because he didn't start saving sooner, right? And so once you get to that and find out what's really going on, what really drove him there, not only is there an emotional connection made there, by the way, right now, but now you know the driver of why they're there, and it takes the relationship and the conversation to another level. So that's my long way of saying I could go even more into like the things to do in the meeting as opposed to winging it. But if I went in and just winged it, and said, all right, I'm going to go in today and ask the questions that feel right. Just kind of have a conversation like I would with any friend that I've known for 25 years. I actually don't have that many friends for 25 years. I'm not sure why I used that number, but any friend that I've known for a long time, then you kind of wing it. And I may not have gotten that out of him, right? That's my point, is if I'd winged it, I don't know what the outcome would have been. If I have, for example, these 2 questions that I ask every single time, I'm still curious. It's not scripted. I'm still curious to hear what they're going to say. I'm asking follow-up questions, but it creates a more predictable outcome when you start asking, when you're intentional about the questions that you're going to ask, instead of going in and winging it, saying, all right, let's see where this conversation goes.
Well, one thing I think is really cool about what you just said is a lot of people talk about when you go into that intro meeting, you've given a whole bunch of the standard playbook, but one of the things that comes up are, let's talk about your financial goals. And of course, that approach is okay, here's a goal. Now let's peel the onion. Well, what does that make possible for you? Now let's peel the onion. And if you have that, then what does that make possible for you? Let's peel it back. And then if you can do that, what makes possible for you? So it's kind of a backwards approach, whereas you're going in with the what prompted this meeting and why now. And somebody's already given you something probably a whole lot more powerful than some goal, right? Because the goal of saying, well, I want to be able to retire with be able to continue the standard income that I've got right now in retirement. Okay, great. That's a goal. Now, what does that make possible? Why do you want that much money? Or why do you want that little money? Or what does that make possible for you? Right. So the old way is to kind of peel that onion back and keep asking, oh, right, your father died young and never had time to really spend time with his family and his grandchildren. And okay, great, right? Like, so now we're learning something, that there's this huge value to you in your time and being able to spend it without having to work, or whatever you just said with your beautiful example of the 73-year-old guy lifting the boxes, right? So it's like, you're going in a different direction that is absolutely going to help the advisor come up with some of the information he needs to start managing money in a way that is going to absolutely delight that client, take care of them, take care of their wants, their needs, their goals. But you got to it in a more emotionally connected way right off the bat.
Yeah. And that's ultimately what you want to do, to build trust, to build connection, right? So to keep things simple, I always say that in any meeting with a prospect, we're meeting with for the first time, this intro meeting, basically they have three things running through their mind. And they're going, do I like you? Do I trust you? And do I feel certain that you can provide the outcome, do I feel certain that you can solve the problem or deliver the outcome that I'm looking for? And you have to answer those three questions before anybody will ever become a client. If they don't like you and trust you, they're not going to become a client. If they have a problem that's on their mind and they don't feel like they don't feel certain that you can help them solve the problem that they came in to address, then they're not going to become a client. And so you have to answer those three questions. And back to what you said, I think there's a key point there. You're right. The idea is to take the conversation to another level, to go a little bit deeper and peel back and figure out why it's important for them to save. But the other thing that's happening there is you're not forcing your agenda on them trying to figure out what their goals are, at least not yet. And instead of trying to talk about their goals and peel back their goals and figure out what's behind them, you're focusing first and foremost on the thing that's top of mind for them, which is the problem that they have, the reason why they reached out. And Megan Lert says this a lot, and it's not a new concept, but she and I talk about it a lot. Megan, who writes for the kitsis.com blog, where we say, we focus all the time on, hey, most people in general, human beings aren't motivated. They're more motivated to cure pain than they are to achieve goals. Right? So if you're trying to figure out, how do I keep this person motivated? How do I get them to move forward? You don't try to get them to talk about their goals. You, at least not in this meeting. You have to at some point, but in this meeting, you're focused solely on their pain. And it's the same reason why people have no problem taking painkillers, but we don't take vitamins, because we need to cure our pain. That's a motivating force. And you can leverage that, not in an inhumane way, not in a sleazy way. You leverage that in these meetings by focusing on their problems, leveraging their desire to cure the pain so that they can become a client. And so I think I just wanted to clarify that oftentimes what we try to do, a big mistake I know that I've made plenty of times, that a lot of advisors make, is they're trying to say, hey, let's talk about all the things that we can get you to, when they're the prospects in there going, hey, I'm here for this one reason. I just need to know, like, do I like you? Do I trust you? And can you solve this problem that I have?
Well, in my business coaching life, which I did before I came to White Glove, that was one of the things I would coach a lot of my entrepreneurs on, is how do you set up your business? How do you sell whatever it is you sell? And the answer was always, you sell a painkiller, not a vitamin. People will dump their money on the counter to get rid of a migraine headache. It doesn't matter. I don't care what tools, I don't care what, take all of the money. If you can get rid of this migraine, I will buy your product. I don't need to vet it. Just take the money. Yeah. If it's a vitamin, I don't know how to value that vitamin. I don't know how much money is it worth to, whatever. So I've always said we need to sell painkillers, not vitamins. So I love that Megan Lert says that. I want to drill in though on a piece that you just mentioned, though, the 3 things that you have to solve. That third one was, are you the expert for me? Are you the person who can solve this problem? So in that intro meeting, you've acknowledged that it's important for advisors to establish their expertise, their credibility. How do they do that, Brendan, without coming across as really salesy and really boring and arrogant?
Yeah, it's all important, but this is what everybody always wants to know is like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but how do I get them to see that I can help them? How do I articulate my values? Because I can do all these great things, right? And I agree with that. And I've been there too, where you're like, okay, I can do all these great things. I've helped all these other people. I want this person to know how I can help them too. Like, we can do cash flow management, get your cash flow in order, set up a good investment portfolio in alignment with your goals. By the way, we're going to talk about your goals and what's most important to you in your life. We'll get your estate planning, your life insurance in order. We'll help you walk through the difficult challenges in life. We're going to keep you invested through the downturn. In fact, when I was building the course out, I went and spent a little time researching the value that an advisor provides to see what the longest list was that I could find, where somebody had like put out a document on the internet of like the value an advisor provides. And there's one list of like 50 plus things that an advisor does that adds value, both technical and non-technical. Right. And so I think it's important to start there and go, when you know you can help people because you've helped so many other people and you have all these ways that you can help, it's really tempting to say, hey, I can help you in all of these ways. Look at all this value that I provided. I can still remember a phone call that I had with a guy that I wanted to work with, a prospect. He hadn't come in for a meeting. I was just trying to like kind of get him sold on the idea. And I remember sitting there feeling stressed, like, okay, how do I articulate the value of all this? And then I remember hanging up after the call being like, I literally just rambled for 5 minutes trying to explain all the things we do and all the areas we could help. I even threw in an analogy about how it's like a GPS. And I went on for 5 minutes. And at the end, I remember apologizing to him, being like, hey, I'm so sorry. I basically just talked your ear off. And I expect him to be like, no, that was so helpful. It's really good. And I can totally see all the value that you provide. And he was like, no, that's fine. I got to go. My family's coming over. And I was like, okay, well, that was the example of how not to do it. And guess what? If I had been asking him questions about himself and curious in him and getting him talking, I bet he probably wouldn't have been in a rush to go meet with his family. Right. But what
Absolutely.
I was doing was but I say that to say this, it comes from a good place. You know, you can help and you want to help. So how do you actually articulate it in a way that answers that third question where they go, yes, you are the person that can solve my problem and deliver the outcome that I have. So I think I'm going to use this analogy. I've used it some. So if anybody's out there that's heard it before, just bear with me, but I think it's helpful and it's relevant. But a few years ago, I guess it was a couple of years ago now, we were at our house. We're inside. My wife looks out and our grass is really tall, right? It needs to be cut. We just moved in. And so we didn't have a lawnmower. We moved from an HOA where they cut the grass for us. We didn't have a lawnmower. It didn't have anybody to do it for us. She's sitting there looking out at the grass. It's higher than you want it to be. Our kids even made a joke about how we lived in a jungle. It's kind of embarrassing. Anyways, so it's like, hey, we need to get this grass cut. I know I need to get it done because my wife's on me about it, and understandably so, not a knock on her. So we have this guy come over. I call him because I need somebody to mow the lawn. So he comes over. We're outside the front door talking. And he's like, hey, good to meet you. I'm so-and-so. And I was like, awesome. Thanks for coming. Yeah. As you can see, we need the lawn mowed. I got to get this done. It's getting out of control. And he's like, yeah, okay, we can do that. And I also, as I was walking up, I also figured like, hey, we could add some mulch. If you want, we could add some mulch in the garden. I could trim some of these bushes for you. We need to cut the vine off the tree. We can probably put a little rock wall in front of your flower garden to make it look a little better, and listed off like 3 or 4 more things. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I had this, I wasn't thinking this at the time, but in hindsight, this is what I started thinking back on. And yes, I do have a problem because in every area of my life, I'm always going, how does this relate to financial planning with clients? But that's another story. And so I'm sitting there like, hey, I just have this one problem that I need solved. And he's trying to paint this vision of what our yard could be. And it came from a good place, right? Like he saw all the things that he could do. But meanwhile, I'm like, hey man, can you mow my lawn? Because my wife's going to get on to me if you can't mow the lawn. I'm sure all those other things are great, but let's solve this problem now. And then we'll do the rest later. Right. So what he was doing was trying to display all of his value in this one conversation of all the great things that he could do. And I get it. He could probably make our lawn look really great. I had this one thing on my mind that I need cured in that moment. Right. And so the lesson from that is he was taking this shotgun approach where he was taking these shots, and the shotgun, when you pull the trigger, or the bullets spew in a bunch of different directions. And so he was taking like 6 or 7 different shots of things he could do, instead of taking the sniper approach and saying, I hear you say you have this one problem. Let's address that one problem first, and then we'll move forward from there. So that's what I call the sniper and shotgun approach. You want to take a sniper approach. And when you take the sniper approach, it becomes really, really easy to articulate your value, because all you're doing is you're diving in on that one problem that they have that brought them there in the first place. So back to my example a second ago, the guy said he needed to start saving for retirement. He wanted to do it because he didn't want to be the 73-year-old that hates his life. I could have from there gone, okay, yeah, that's great. We can get that set up for you. And then after that, we'll check your insurance. We'll get your estate planning in order. What else do you think we need to do? Right. And I could have gone that path, but he said, hey, I have this one problem that I need solved. And so all I did was ask him more about that problem. If we stayed focused on the thing that was top of mind for him, saying, okay, what have you done? What have you done thus far? How do you feel about what you've done thus far? Do you feel confident in the plan that you have now that it'll get you to that point? Well, no, that's why I'm here, is because I don't feel confident in it. Okay, well, what areas have you found that are holding you back? Well, and I'm kind of paraphrasing and trying to remember, this is 2 or 3 years ago now, but he said, well, like, what's held you back? What's not working? He's like, well, when I sit down and start looking at it, I get overwhelmed because there's all these different accounts that I could be putting the money into, and I don't really know exactly what amount I should be putting into it. I don't want to put in too much because we still have to pay for our life today. So I've got I just get a little bit overwhelmed when I sit down, and I ended up not doing anything. So then you start asking, okay, I totally understand that. So it sounds like you need a little help figuring out the right account, optimizing the account, and then the dollar amount, because you want to start saving, but you don't want to sacrifice your life today for the future tomorrow. And he says, that's exactly right. So as you're going through asking these questions, follow-up questions on the problem that brought them in, you're building a level of trust and connection because you're letting them talk about the problems they have, and that always feels good, right? I'll mention this now because it's something I always try to mention. Moira Summers, the author of Advice That Sticks, has research that shows that the number one predictor of satisfaction in these meetings is the amount of airtime that the person gets, that the prospect gets.
100%.
Right? So you're trying to all you're doing is getting them to talk, getting them to open up, tell you about their problem, tell you where they've struggled with it, tell you where they need help, right? So now he said, I need to retire, or I want to start saving for retirement. I don't want to be the 73-year-old that hates his life. And I really need help evaluating the different account options that are available and settling on the right number to get it done, settling on the right number to start funneling in there every single month. Right? So at that point, it becomes really easy to display and articulate your value, because he told me exactly what it was that he needs. So instead of taking this shotgun approach going, okay, I could do cash management and investments and estate planning and life insurance and debt management, and by the way, a little retirement planning. I didn't have to overwhelm them with the shotgun approach. It became this, all right, great. Well, this is right in our wheelhouse. We can help you get set up to get to get your money flowing in the right accounts every single month and with the right amount, so that you're not sacrificing your life today for a future that's uncertain tomorrow. And so in that, it becomes a lot easier. I know I keep saying this, but I'm passionate about it. When you get the exact problem to be solved, it becomes really easy to tie your services directly to what that problem is. That's really what it's all about, is you find out what the problem is, and then articulating your value becomes explaining it directly as the cure for the problem that they have, instead of trying to throw a bunch of darts at the wall.
Well, and by the way, and this is, I'm sure, fairly obvious, but it just bears saying that we talk a lot about building trust. Right? The whole financial relationship, financial industry, financial planning and advice industry has to be built on trust. And that's not going to be built, it's all done in one workshop or in one intro meeting or in one follow-up meeting. It's going to be built over time. And part of the way that you're building that trust is by honoring and listening to your client. Like you said, giving them that airtime. They want to feel seen, heard, and understood. Right. And when you do that, you're building trust. And when you solve the one problem, rather than trying to tell them every other thing that they need to worry about, that's fairly overwhelming, of course. But when you solve that one problem and you do that well, the guy came and mowed your lawn. He did a great job. Hands you his business card at the end. And you're like, yeah, so you do these other services. Cool. I may call you back to handle these shrubs later.
That's right.
Because you just the one problem, you delivered on what I asked you to do. And, you made it look good. Now I'm willing to maybe consider going a little deeper with you, because you also just deepened the relationship there with me in that trust level by delivering on what I asked you to do.
That's right. Yeah. And at the same time, like, not only am I going to use you because you've done a good job and you've built trust, but I'm also in a place where I'm able to actually think about all the other things that we could do. Like, it's really hard. The same thing goes for clients, by the way. It's really hard when somebody comes in and says, hey, I just had this massive tax bill last year. I need to figure out ways to minimize that. Or somebody comes in and they say, like the example I keep using, the guy's like, hey, I really need to get set up to save like for retirement. It's really hard to get somebody when they have this one myopic focus, this one linear focus, to think beyond that until that thing is cured, until it's done. But once it's done, then you're at a place where you can start thinking differently. Once the lawn's mowed, and I know that's on, he's coming every couple of weeks to get that done. Now I'm at a place where I can start thinking about doing other things, right?
Well, it's the painkiller and vitamin again, right? Like, the pain is the grass. My wife is not happy.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's exactly
the vine on the tree. That's a vitamin. I'm sure that's important. It's good for my health. I'll be happier later, but that's just not on my radar right now.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. That's a perfect example.
Yeah. So, all right, we could go on and on and on, but I'm going to ask you to tell me a little bit before we go about how we can find out more about your guide and what we could look forward to receiving if we buy that guide, because I think everybody listening could benefit from learning exactly how you break it down in this ultimate intro meeting guide.
Yeah. So do we have a couple minutes to talk about one more thing that I think's maybe the most important? I think it's all important, right? But there's something that I think is a powerful way to make these meetings go really well every time. And that is, and it has to do with this idea of how do you build trust and rapport right out of the gate. And so for our whole lives, we're in this industry, you always hear like, okay, try to create some rapport. And so I know I've been there, but you kind of go like, all right, so do I do that with small talk? Like, do we talk about the weather? Do we talk about like our sports teams, or like what we're doing this weekend, the trips that we're taking? And my thought around that is essentially, it's not, small talk's not bad. It's just not as helpful and productive as other things can be. So small talk's not doing harm. It's not causing damage, but there are other things you could be doing intentionally instead of small talk that actually start priming some trust, that start moving the trust dial to get the person opened up, to start creating conversational flow. So the easiest way I can explain to do that is right out of the gate, right at the very beginning of these meetings. If you're trying, whenever you normally do small talk, you're going to be really tempted to ask, how are you? How's it going? How was the weekend? Those are okay questions, but you're not going to get great answers. We have to like basically reprogram in our minds what we expect from those questions. How are you? Good. How was your weekend? It was good. We had a good time, right? That's not what you're going for. That doesn't get somebody excited to start talking. So how do you get somebody to open up and start talking right out of the gate? It takes a little takes some practice. It also takes some planning. But you want to ask what I call a 3E question. 3E because it has to be easy to answer, exciting to answer, and have an emotional component to it. Easy, exciting, and emotional. Because if you can get somebody if you can ask questions that are easy, exciting, and emotional, it gets somebody opening up. It starts priming their conversational pump, and it creates conversational flow to where your problem isn't, how do I get this person to open up? The problem is, how do I get them to shut up so that we can move into the actual conversation? Now, I know that sounds bad. I don't like saying that. In fact, I hope there's a better, but it's catchy, right? So I hope that there's a better way to say it, and I'll come up with it eventually. But the problem isn't how do I get them to open up? It's how do I transition to what we need to talk about, because we don't have all day. So what is an example of a 3E question? An easy, exciting, and emotional question. Here are a few that are basic but powerful. So one would be, I'm in Nashville, right? So how did you end up in Nashville? How long have you been here? How did you end up here? Easy because I've answered it before. Exciting because I get to talk about myself, and emotional because I get to go back and relive my past. Another one would be if you work with a business owner, for example. So I know maybe it's a long-time client. Maybe it's, in this example, it's a prospect. So you're like, hey, I see where you've got this business. It looks like it's doing well. Maybe you're familiar with the business, but then just say, but I'm kind of curious. Obviously, you're doing well now. Where did the idea to start this business even come from? Like, where did you come up with this idea? And by the way, anybody that loves it, people love talking about their businesses. They love talking about their kids. They love talking about their past. So if you get somebody to talk about those things, that's easy, exciting, and emotional. And then the last one, if you're meeting with a couple, is this one's simple. I know probably a lot of people out there have done this to some degree, but just being intentional about starting this way and saying, hey, thanks for coming in. I always like asking this. It's my favorite question to ask. How did you guys meet? Right. And then you're getting them to tell something that they'll open up and talk. Oftentimes you'll get the person to talk that's not the numbers person. So you'll get them to open up and engage right away, and it gets the conversation flowing. And then once the conversation's flowing, you're going to get better responses when you're asking what prompted this, why now, and getting more details. They're now ready to talk more. And again, the problem becomes, how do I keep this condensed to the meeting, like to the time frame that we've committed to? But you'd rather have that problem than the problem of going, why is this person not telling me anything? What am I doing wrong? Why can't I get them to open up? Anyways, I just wanted to share that because how you start the meeting dictates the trajectory of the meeting. If you start that way, you're going to have better meetings.
Man, I'm so glad you included that, but you are going to have to talk fast now. Okay. So tell us how we can find out more about your guide.
Yeah. So, well, it's more important for me to help people have better meetings than it is to have them find me. But so you can go to the website, wiredplanning.com. It'll be linked to some of the posts in there. I send it out via email every now and then. You can also reach out to me directly on both Twitter and LinkedIn, or via email. That's totally fine. Or listen to the podcast. You'll hear me mention it on there from time to time as well.
Well, I love all of the stuff that you're posting on LinkedIn. I think covers so much of what you've shared a little bit of today. Like, we've just kind of scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But you provide so many really helpful questions and such a great framework for just getting in the right mindset. Like, what am I trying to accomplish? How do I do that well? How do I get the best results for these people in the easiest and most effective way? And I think you make it really simple. So we will make sure that we put your email, your website, all of your stuff in our show notes so people can find you and learn more. But I just think you do such a phenomenal job of breaking down something that I think, like you said, sets the trajectory for the whole relationship. And if it's done well, it can be just so productive. And that's something that I feel like all of our clients at White Glove could really benefit from. But just anybody out there listening, you can benefit from having better meetings. And I'm sure that you're going to check Brendan out for that. So before we go, Brendan, I always like to close with just checking in and hearing what my guest definition of success is. So I will let you answer that any way you want to in any realm of your life or work. But I'd just love to hear how you define success.
Yeah, this is one of those questions that I like hearing other people's answers to, and then I start formulating my own and I get a little bit of anxiety, or I get stressed out about it a little bit. But yeah, I spent a little time thinking about it. And I think for me at this phase of my life, success is making a difference and an impact for advisors and clients around the world. Like, that's a big thing for me, right? It's on my vision map. It's on my whiteboard over there, is building a community that makes a difference around the world. But at the same time, maybe more importantly, is, do I have the time and money flexibility to do the things that I want with my family, with my wife, and with my kids? Like, do we have a thriving, passionate marriage? My wife's a marriage counselor, so we have no choice but to be in a good marriage, right? So but we want to anyways. But so is our marriage great? And am I an active, present dad? And that's do I have the ability to do those things without anything taken away from it? And that's kind of, at this point in my life, those are like the three filters that I evaluate my life through: are wife or marriage, kids, and business. That sounds kind of boring. It is boring, but it's just try to keep it simple.
Sounds like you're on track, man. Great job. Thanks for leading, and thanks for kind of helping demonstrate that so other people can, pick their path and find a way to do it effectively too. So, Brendan, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Fast Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Brendan, I needed you 10 years ago. I'll just be honest. I would work with clients, talk to folks, talk to prospects, and it was like they were drinking from a fire hose, because I was telling them all the different things, the problems I could solve. Yeah, I just needed to shut up, and I didn't. So it took me a little while to get that craft down. It took probably 2 years into my company before I realized I'm not landing as many clients because I'm not, listening as much as I should. So thank you for all you do. Lara, here's the thing. Again, you bring on so many great guests. There are advisors out there that are not connected with White Glove listening to this, and they need to connect with you. So please give them your information as well.
Just join us over on the website, whiteglove.com, or you can email us info@whiteglove.com.
Perfect. Thank you both again. And of course, our last thank you will always go to you, listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Fast Podcast with Lara Galloway. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Lara comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually does help others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at White Glove, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Fast Podcast, Financial Advisor Strategy Talks with Lara Galloway, your go-to source designed to help you grow your business. Have questions about the topics covered during the show? Visit our website at www.whiteglove.com or email us at info@whiteglove.com. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of White Glove. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial services provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.